Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. At dawn, Texas farmer Clint Maddox found his gate chain gone and a free parking sign planted by a pushy HOA. By sundown, 73 cars were trapped behind a razor wire fence, and Clint was ready to teach a ruthless lesson in property rights no one would forget. My name is Clint Maddox, 39 years old, former military police officer turned owner of a 150-acre private farm on the outskirts of a small Texas town. I've been living on this land for 8 years now, ever since I left the service, and I've got every square inch of it properly documented, surveyed, and fenced. Well, most of it anyway. There's this flat, grassy strip along the main road that some folks seem to think is public property, but it's not. It's mine, just like everything else within my property lines. Saturday morning started like any other. I woke up at 5:30, made my coffee, and headed out to check the perimeter fencing. It's something I do every weekend without fail. Old habits from the military, I suppose. The morning air was crisp, and I was looking forward to a quiet day working on the new irrigation system I'd been installing near the north pasture. That peaceful feeling lasted exactly until I reached my southern gate. The chain was gone. Not broken, not cut, completely removed. In its place stood a hand-painted wooden sign that made my blood pressure spike instantly. Parking free, courtesy of Cedar Oaks HOA. The sign was professional enough, painted in bright blue letters with white trim, but it was sitting on my property without my permission. I stood there for a full minute, just staring at this audacious piece of wood, feeling that familiar military police instinct kicking in. I pulled out my phone and called the non-emergency police line. While I waited for them to answer, I walked around the sign examining it. Someone had driven metal stakes deep into my ground to secure it. The grass around the gate showed tire tracks from multiple vehicles, and I could see fresh boot prints in the soft earth. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. This was planned. Officer Martinez arrived within 20 minutes, a young guy I'd seen around town but never dealt with directly. He took photos of the sign, the missing chain, and the tire tracks while I explained the situation. "You got security cameras out here, Mr. Maddox?" he asked, scribbling notes on his pad. "Sure do," I replied, pulling out my phone to access the camera system. The footage from 5:30 that morning was crystal clear. 3 people in dark clothing had arrived in a pickup truck, removed my chain with bolt cutters, and installed their sign. The license plate was partially visible, and one of the figures was definitely a woman with shoulder-length hair. Officer Martinez copied the footage to his phone and filed a vandalism report. By 9 o'clock, the first cars started arriving. A silver sedan pulled up, and an elderly couple got out, pointing at the sign and nodding approvingly. I walked over to intercept them. "Excuse me, folks, but this is private property. That sign was put up without my permission." The woman looked confused. "But it says free parking, courtesy of the Homeowners Association. We're here for the Cedar Oaks Festival." "Ma'am, I don't know anything about any festival, and I'm not part of any Homeowners Association. This is my farm, and you can't park here." The husband stepped forward, slightly aggressive. "Look, buddy, the sign says free parking. We drove 20 minutes to get here because the HOA website said there was ample parking available." I kept my voice level, but firm. "Sir, someone put that sign up illegally. I've already filed a police report. You need to move your vehicle." They reluctantly left, muttering about mixed messages and poor organization. But for every car I turned away, 2 more seemed to appear. By 10:30, I counted 25 vehicles parked on my grass, and more were arriving every few minutes. The drivers all had the same story. The HOA had advertised free parking on their website and social media. That's when I called Joe and Rick, 2 fellow farmers who'd helped me build my barn last year. "Guys, I need a favor. Can you bring your welding equipment and those metal fence panels we talked about? I've got a situation here that needs immediate attention." Joe laughed when I explained what was happening. "Sounds like somebody's about to learn a hard lesson about property rights. We'll be there in an hour with everything you need." At 11:15, a white SUV pulled up with Cedar Oaks HOA, board member magnets on the doors. Out stepped Linda Rockwell, a woman I'd met exactly 3 times in 8 years, each time when she'd casually suggested I might want to let the community use my land for various events. She was dressed in a crisp white pantsuit, carrying a clipboard, and wearing the kind of smile that politicians practice in mirrors. "Clint," she called out cheerfully, as if we were old friends. "I see you've discovered our little arrangement." I hope you don't mind. We're just temporarily borrowing this section for community benefit. The festival brings so much joy to everyone. I walked over to her, my phone already recording. Linda, I mind very much. This is my private property, and you had no right to remove my chain or put up that sign. I want it gone now. Her smile faltered slightly. Oh, Clint, don't be so rigid. It's just for one day. Think of it as your contribution to community spirit. Besides, look how well your land works for parking. It's almost like it was meant for this. It's meant for cattle grazing, which is what I use it for. Remove the sign and tell people to leave, or I'll remove it myself. Linda's facade cracked completely. You can't just kick out all these people. They've already walked to the festival. Some of them are elderly. You'd really cause that kind of disruption over a patch of grass. I stopped recording and looked her straight in the eye. Linda, you broke into my property and vandalized my gate. I've got it all on camera and I've already filed a police report. You've got exactly 1 hour to get that sign down and those cars move before I take action myself. She laughed, actually laughed, waving her clipboard dismissively. What action? You're going to call the police again? They've got better things to do than referee a neighborhood dispute. These people aren't hurting anything, Clint. Stop being so selfish. That's when I heard Joe's diesel truck rumbling up the road, followed by Rick's flatbed loaded with metal panels. Linda's confident expression shifted to confusion as the two trucks parked near my gate. Both men got out wearing work clothes and serious expressions. Everything ready, Clint? Joe asked, already unloading welding equipment. Ready as we'll ever be, I replied, watching Linda's face go pale. By noon, my field looked like a used car lot during a holiday sale. 73 vehicles were now parked haphazardly across my grazing land, everything from compact cars to massive pickup trucks with boat trailers. Some genius had even brought an RV and set up lawn chairs. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was also about to become these people's worst nightmare. Joe and Rick had arrived with 3 trucks loaded with welding equipment, metal fence panels, and enough hardware to secure a small military base. The beauty of having farmer friends is that we're all prepared for emergency fence repairs, and we work fast when livestock, or in this case, trespassers, need containing. Rick had even brought his portable generator and floodlights, anticipating we might need to work into the evening. All right, boys, I said, spreading out a hand-drawn map of the field on Rick's tailgate. We're going to fence the entire parking area, leaving just one exit point right here by the main gate. Standard cattle panels 6 feet high with razor wire along the top edge. And before you ask, yes, this is completely legal. It's my land, and I can fence it however I want. Joe grinned, pulling on his welding gloves. Haven't had this much fun since we caught those teenagers stealing corn from my north field. How long do we have before the festival lets out? About 4 hours, give or take. More than enough time if we work efficiently. What happened next was like watching a military operation unfold. We divided the area into sections, with each of us taking responsibility for roughly 100 feet of fence line. The metal panels were designed to interlock, and we'd use this same system to build emergency livestock containments during storm seasons. Muscle memory kicked in, and we fell into a rhythm that would have made our old drill sergeants proud. The first challenge came when a middle-aged man in khakis and a polo shirt approached us around 12:30. He was obviously returning from the festival for something he'd forgotten in his car. "Excuse me, what's going on here? You can't fence off the parking area while people's cars are inside." I paused my welding and flipped up my mask. "Sir, this is private property, and these vehicles are parked here illegally. You might want to move your car before we finish this fence." His face went red. "This is ridiculous. The HOA specifically said this was available parking. I demand you stop this immediately." "The HOA lied to you," I replied calmly, returning to my work. "They don't own this land, they don't rent this land, and they had no authority to offer parking here. Your beef is with them, not me." He stomped off, presumably to find Linda or call someone in authority. That was fine with me. Every minute of delay worked in our favor. By 1:15, we had completed the north and east sides of the fence. The trapped vehicles looked increasingly ominous behind the growing metal barrier. Linda returned at 1:30 with 2 other HOA board members and someone who was obviously their lawyer. Expensive suit, briefcase, and that particular look of barely contained panic that lawyers get when their clients have done something spectacularly stupid. She marched up to me with her entourage in tow. "Clint Maddox, you stop this nonsense right now. You cannot imprison people's vehicles. This is illegal detention of property, and Marcus here will have you arrested." Marcus, the lawyer, looked less confident than Linda sounded. He approached cautiously, eyeing the professional quality of our fence work. "Mr. Maddox, I'm Marcus Shane, attorney for Cedar Oaks HOA. While I understand your frustration about unauthorized parking, you cannot simply impound these vehicles. There are legal procedures that must be followed." I set down my welding torch and walked over to my truck, returning with a folder of documents. "Mr. Shane, here are my property deeds, survey maps, and the police report I filed this morning regarding vandalism of my gate and unauthorized installation of signage. Your clients broke the law first. I'm simply securing my private property." Marcus flipped through the documents, his expression growing more troubled with each page. "The individuals who parked here may not have known it was private property. They relied on information provided by my clients in good faith." "That's between you and them," I replied. "But the cars stay put until the parking fees are paid. $300 per vehicle, cash or card. No checks." Linda's voice pitched higher. $300? That's extortion. These are hard-working families, not millionaires. Linda, you cost these people money the moment you decided to use my land without permission. They can either pay me or they can sue you for misleading them. Either way, the cars don't leave until someone pays. By 2 o'clock, we had completed 3 sides of the fence. The final side would block the only remaining exit, creating a perfect enclosure. Word was spreading through the festival crowd, and I could see small groups of people walking over to check on their vehicles, only to discover the growing fence around them. Rick was installing the gate mechanism when the first person broke and paid up. A woman in her 60s approached with her purse in hand, looking embarrassed but resigned. "Sir, I just want to get my car and go home." "I'll pay your fee." I accepted her $300 in cash, opened the gate long enough for her to drive out, then locked it again. That seemed to break the psychological barrier. Over the next hour, 4 more people paid and retrieved their vehicles. But the majority were either still at the festival or hoping this was some kind of bluff that would resolve itself. At 3:45, we installed the final panel and locked the gate with a heavy-duty padlock. 73 vehicles had entered my improvised impound lot. 5 had bought their way out. 68 remained, and their owners were about to get the surprise of their lives. I mounted a large metal sign to the gate that Rick had helped me prepare earlier. Private property, parking fee $300 per vehicle, payment required before exit. Below that, in smaller letters, vehicles abandoned for more than 24 hours will be towed at owner's expense. The festival was scheduled to end at 6 o'clock. In just over 2 hours, those 68 car owners would discover that their free parking had become very expensive indeed. I settled into a lawn chair by the gate, opened a cold beer, and waited for the entertainment to begin. 6 o'clock arrived with the punctuality of a military operation. The Cedar Oaks Summer Festival was winding down, and the first wave of exhausted families began making their way back to what they thought was free parking. I could hear them before I could see them. Casual conversation, children complaining about tired feet, someone laughing about how much funnel cake they'd eaten. The voices grew closer and then suddenly stopped. "What the hell is this?" A man's voice cut through the evening air. From my position by the gate, I watched as a crowd of about 20 people gathered at the fence line, staring in disbelief at their imprisoned vehicles. The metal barrier gleamed under the late afternoon sun, and my professionally printed sign left no room for misinterpretation. Several people pulled out their phones and started taking pictures, while others began reading the sign aloud to those who couldn't get close enough to see it. $300? Are you kidding me? A woman in a festival t-shirt shouted toward the gate where I sat. This has got to be illegal. I stood up, straightened my old military uniform jacket that I'd put on specifically for the psychological effect, and walked over with my folder of documents and a battery-powered megaphone I'd borrowed from Rick's farm. Equipment. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. "Good evening, folks," I announced through the megaphone, my voice carrying clearly across the field. "My name is Clint Maddox, and this is my private property. Your vehicles are parked here illegally after someone vandalized my gate and installed unauthorized signage. The fee for parking is $300 per vehicle, payable in cash or by card. No checks, no IOUs, no promises to pay later." The crowd's reaction was immediate and loud. Voices overlapped as people shouted questions, demands, and threats. A few tried to approach the fence as if they might climb over it, but the razor wire along the top discouraged that idea quickly. One particularly angry man in a Cowboys jersey started rattling the fence panels, testing their stability. "You can't do this," he yelled. "This is kidnapping our cars. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I replied calmly. "I filed the first police report this morning when your HOA vandalized my property. Officer Martinez has all the documentation." That's when several people did exactly what I expected. They started making phone calls. Some called 911, others called friends or family members, and a few smart ones were probably calling lawyers. Within 15 minutes, I could see 3 police cruisers making their way down the rural road toward my farm. The lead vehicle belonged to Sergeant Thomas Wheeler, a guy I'd served with briefly in Germany before he'd gotten out and joined local law enforcement. Tom climbed out of his patrol car with the weary expression of someone who'd already been briefed on the situation via radio. "Clint," he nodded, then turned to address the growing crowd. "All right, everyone, step back from the fence. We need some space to sort this out." I handed Tom my folder before he could ask for it. "Property deeds, survey maps, and the vandalism report from this morning. Everything's documented and legal." Tom spent several minutes reviewing the documents while his 2 backup officers kept the crowd calm. I could see him occasionally glancing at the fence, clearly impressed by the professional quality of our work. When he finished reading, he walked over to examine the gate mechanism and the sign more closely. "The fence work is solid," he said quietly, so only I could hear. "And your documentation is thorough. Legally speaking, you're in the clear. But Clint, we've got 70+ people here who are going to miss work tomorrow if they can't get their cars." "That's not my problem, Tom. Linda Rockwell and her HOA created this situation when they decided to steal my land for their event. These people can either pay me or sue the HOA for misleading them." Tom sighed and turned back to the crowd. "Folks, I've reviewed the documentation, and Mr. Maddox is within his legal rights. This is private property, and you are parked here without permission. The HOA had no authority to offer parking on land they don't own or lease." The crowd erupted again, but this time the anger was directed as much toward the HOA as toward me. I heard several people mentioning that they'd never been told this was private property, and a few were already making angry phone calls to Linda Rockwell. That's when the first person decided to cut their losses. A young couple approached the gate with a credit card in hand. "Sir, we just want to go home. We've got a babysitter waiting, and we can't afford to miss work tomorrow." I accepted their payment using a mobile card reader I'd borrowed from Rick's farm stand business. $300 plus a $2 processing fee. The young man winced at the total but paid without complaint. I unlocked the gate, allowed them to retrieve their Honda Civic, and locked it again behind them. Word spread quickly that I was actually accepting payments and releasing vehicles. Over the next 30 minutes, 4 more car owners stepped forward with cash or cards. Each transaction was conducted professionally and courteously. I wasn't trying to be vindictive toward the individual drivers, just expensive enough to make the HOA think twice about pulling this stunt again. But the majority of the crowd was still hoping for some kind of miracle resolution. They clustered in small groups, making phone calls and waiting for someone in authority to arrive and fix this situation. I could hear fragments of their conversations, calls to spouses, complaints to Linda Rockwell's voicemail, and at least one person trying to reach a lawyer. As the sun began to set, portable lights around the fence automatically clicked on, bathing the entire area in bright white illumination. The professional appearance of the setup was clearly having a psychological effect on the trapped car owners. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment revenge scheme. This was a well-planned operation with permanent-looking infrastructure. Tom Wheeler approached me one more time before preparing to leave. "Clint, I've got to ask, how long are you planning to keep this up? Until every car is paid for, or until someone with legal authority orders me to do otherwise?" "But Tom, I want you to know, Linda Rockwell personally told me this morning that she was temporarily borrowing my land for community benefit. I've got that conversation recorded on my phone." Tom's expression shifted to one of professional interest. "You recorded her admitting to unauthorized use of your property?" "Every word. She made it clear this was intentional and planned, not some innocent mistake." As the police prepared to leave, having determined that no laws were being broken by the property owner, the crowd began to thin out. Some people arranged rides with friends who had parked elsewhere. Others decided to wait and see if the HOA would resolve the situation. But a core group of about 30 people remained, determined to get their cars without paying what they considered an unfair ransom. I settled back into my chair with another cold beer, knowing that the real fireworks were still to come. Linda Rockwell hadn't shown her face since the fence went up, but I had a feeling that was about to change. And when she did arrive, I was ready for her. 7:30 brought the sound of multiple car doors slamming and raised voices approaching from the main road. Linda Rockwell had arrived with reinforcements, 3 other HOA board members, their lawyer Marcus Shane, and what looked like a small army of angry residents from Cedar Oaks. She marched toward the gate like a general leading troops into battle, clipboard in one hand and cell phone in the other. "This ends now, Clint," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You've made your point, but you cannot hold these people's property hostage over a simple misunderstanding." I stood up from my chair and walked to the gate, my phone already recording. "Linda, there's no misunderstanding here. You vandalized my property and used my land without permission. That's theft and trespassing, both criminal offenses." Marcus Shane stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Maddox, my client, is prepared to discuss compensation for any inconvenience caused. Surely we can reach a reasonable settlement without involving all these innocent people." "Your client can discuss compensation after she pays the parking fees," I replied. 73 vehicles at $300 each equals $21,900. Cash, card, or bank transfer. I don't accept checks from people who steal land. The crowd of onlookers gasped at the total. Several people pulled out calculators on their phones to verify my math, while others stared at Linda with newfound understanding of just how expensive her simple misunderstanding had become. Linda's face flushed red. "That's absolutely ridiculous. These are hard-working families, not criminals. You're trying to profit from an honest mistake." I pulled out my phone and played back her recorded words from that morning. "We're just temporarily borrowing this section for community benefit." It's almost like it was meant for this. Her own voice echoed clearly in the evening air, and the crowd's murmur shifted noticeably. Several Cedar Oaks residents were hearing for the first time that their HOA president had knowingly used someone else's property. "Does that sound like an honest mistake to you folks?" I asked the gathered crowd. She admitted on tape that this was intentional. She knew it was my land, and she took it anyway. A woman from the crowd spoke up angrily. "Linda, you told us the parking was all arranged. You said you had permission to use this field." Other voices joined in, and I could see the HOA president's support crumbling in real time. Marcus Shane tried desperately to salvage the situation. "My client may have misspoken this morning. The HOA believed in good faith that this arrangement had been properly coordinated. We're prepared to offer reasonable compensation and ensure this doesn't happen again." "The compensation is $21,900, I repeated firmly. "And it needs to be paid tonight if you want these cars released. Every hour they stay here after midnight incurs additional storage fees." Linda was clearly panicking now. The professional facade had completely cracked, and she was facing a hostile crowd of her own neighbors who were realizing they'd been misled. "Clint, please be reasonable. We can work out a payment plan, maybe spread it over several months." "Linda, you should have thought about payment plans before you decided to steal my land. You've got until midnight to come up with the money, or these cars start accruing daily storage fees at $50 per vehicle." Just then, a woman with a press badge approached the group. Sarah Connor from the local newspaper had apparently gotten wind of the story and arrived with a camera and notebook. "Excuse me, I'm with the Texas County Herald. Can someone explain what's happening here?" I gladly provided her with a summary while Linda tried unsuccessfully to slip away from the growing media attention. By 8:15, 3 more car owners had paid the fee and retrieved their vehicles, but the majority were still waiting for the HOA to resolve the crisis their leadership had created. The evening was far from over, and Linda Rockwell's nightmare was just beginning. Sunday morning brought an unexpected development. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. with calls from farmers, ranchers, and property owners across 3 counties. Word of the Cedar Oaks parking trap had spread through rural Texas like wildfire, and apparently I'd become something of a folk hero overnight. Local radio stations were calling it the day a farmer fought back, and social media was buzzing with videos that festival attendees had posted. Sarah Connor's newspaper article had hit the internet around midnight, complete with photos of the fence and quotes from angry Cedar Oaks residents who felt betrayed by their HOA. The story was being shared on Facebook groups for property rights advocates, and I was getting friend requests from people I'd never met. But Linda Rockwell wasn't taking her public humiliation quietly. Monday morning brought a certified letter delivered by a very nervous postal worker. The legal document was impressive, 12 pages of dense legalese accusing me of unlawful detention of property, extortion, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and damage to the reputation of Cedar Oaks Homeowners Association. I called my lawyer immediately. Colonel James Harris had been a military attorney for 25 years before retiring to private practice in Texas. He specialized in property rights cases and had a particular hatred for HOAs that overstepped their authority. "Clint, this lawsuit is garbage," James said after reviewing the document, "but we need to respond aggressively. They're trying to intimidate you into backing down. Instead, we're going to file a countersuit that'll make them wish they'd never heard your name." By Tuesday, James had prepared our response. Our countersuit accused the HOA of criminal trespassing, vandalism, theft of services, defamation, and conspiracy to defraud property owners. We demanded $75,000 in damages plus attorney fees, and we requested a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from conducting any activities on or near my property. Wednesday brought another wave of publicity when a Dallas television station picked up the story. The reporter interviewed several car owners who'd paid the parking fee, and their responses were surprisingly supportive. "The HOA lied to us," said one woman. "This farmer was just protecting his property. I don't blame him for charging us. I blame Linda Rockwell for putting us in that position." Thursday morning, I discovered that Linda had made a critical mistake. In their desperation to discredit me, the HOA had posted a statement on their website claiming I had stolen money from innocent families. James immediately filed an additional defamation suit, and we demanded they retract the statement within 24 hours. Meanwhile, insurance companies representing some of the car owners had started calling. They wanted to understand why their policyholders had been charged $300 for parking, and several were preparing subrogation claims against the HOA. The legal web was becoming increasingly complicated, and Linda Rockwell was at the center of it all. Friday brought the final surrender. 15 more car owners decided they couldn't wait for the legal system to resolve their transportation crisis. They paid the parking fees and retrieved their vehicles, bringing my total collection to 24 cars released and $12,700 earned. Only 38 vehicles remained in my improvised impound lot, but their owners seemed committed to fighting this battle to the bitter end. The weekend passed quietly, but I could feel the storm building. Court dates were being set, depositions were being scheduled, and somewhere in Cedar Oaks, Linda Rockwell was probably having sleepless nights, wondering how a simple attempt to steal a farmer's land had turned into a legal nightmare that threatened to destroy her HOA presidency and possibly her personal finances. The breakthrough came on Monday morning when James Harris called with news that would change everything. "Clint, you need to sit down for this. My investigator found something in the county planning office that's going to blow this case wide open." I was feeding cattle when he called, but his tone made me stop what I was doing immediately. "What did you find, James?" "Linda Rockwell and her HOA have been planning to acquire your southern field for 3 years. We found correspondence between her and Meridian Development Corporation dating back to 2014. They wanted to build a strip mall on your land, and the HOA was supposed to create a compelling public interest case to force you to sell." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. All those casual visits from Linda, suggesting community events on my property, her persistent hints about better uses for my land, the convenient timing of the festival parking. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was a calculated campaign to create legal precedent for taking my property. "There's more," James continued. "Meridian has been paying the HOA consulting fees for community development planning. Guess who personally received $25,000 over 2 years for liaison services? Linda Rockwell. Bingo. She's been taking bribes to set up property seizures. The festival parking was supposed to establish adverse possession claims. If they could show regular community use of your land with your apparent acquiescence, they could argue for easement rights. By Tuesday, word of the corruption investigation had reached Mayor Robert Kane. He called me personally to apologize on behalf of the city and assure me that the planning department was conducting a full review of all HOA-related zoning requests from the past 5 years. Mr. Maddox, I want you to know that several other property owners have come forward with similar stories about pressure from Cedar Oaks HOA. We're looking at a pattern of attempted land acquisition through questionable means. The story hit the Dallas Morning News on Wednesday with the headline, HOA President Took Bribes in Land Grab Scheme. Sarah Connor had done excellent investigative work, uncovering bank records showing payments from Meridian to a consulting company owned by Linda's husband. The web of corruption was more extensive than anyone had imagined. Thursday brought a wave of resignations from the HOA board. 3 members stepped down, citing disagreements with current leadership direction, while a 4th issued a public statement calling for Linda's immediate removal. The Cedar Oaks community was in chaos, with emergency meetings being called and longtime neighbors taking sides. Friday morning, I received an unexpected visitor. District Attorney Michelle Torres arrived with 2 investigators and a briefcase full of documents. Mr. Maddox, we'd like to discuss your cooperation in our criminal investigation of Cedar Oaks HOA. What started as a property dispute has uncovered evidence of bribery, conspiracy, and fraud. She explained that my parking fee caper had inadvertently exposed a multi-year criminal enterprise. Linda's panicked overreaction to the fence incident had drawn attention to financial irregularities that might have gone unnoticed for years. By forcing the conflict into the open, I'd given prosecutors the evidence they needed to build a racketeering case. Over the weekend, 3 more car owners paid the parking fees and retrieved their vehicles. The remaining 35 seemed to understand that they'd become pawns in a much larger game, and several had joined a class action lawsuit against the HOA seeking damages for fraud and misrepresentation. Sunday evening, I stood by my southern gate watching the sunset reflect off the metal fence panels. What had started as a simple property rights dispute had uncovered corruption that reached into city planning offices and development corporations. Linda Rockwell's attempt to steal my land had backfired spectacularly, but I had a feeling the legal battles were just beginning. The 35 remaining cars sat silently in their metal enclosure, monuments to the consequences of underestimating a Texas farmer who'd learned about justice in the military and wasn't afraid to fight for what was right. The courtroom was packed on the morning of October 15th. What had started as a simple property dispute had evolved into the most talked about legal case in Texas County in decades. I sat at the plaintiff's table with James Harris, watching as Linda Rockwell entered with her new legal team. She'd fired Marcus Shane after the corruption revelations and hired a high-priced firm from Dallas. The prosecution had moved fast. District Attorney Torres had filed criminal charges against Linda for bribery, conspiracy, and fraud just 2 weeks earlier. But our civil case was proceeding first, and the evidence we'd compiled over 3 months was devastating. Judge Patricia Hendricks called the court to order, and James opened with our strongest evidence. The jury watched security footage of Linda's people cutting my chain in the pre-dawn darkness, listened to recordings of her admitting the land theft was intentional, and examined bank records showing payments from Meridian Development to her consulting company. Ladies and gentlemen, James told the jury, this wasn't a misunderstanding about parking. This was the final phase of a 3-year criminal conspiracy to steal Mr. Maddox's land for commercial development. Linda's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Wells, tried desperately to paint me as an opportunistic profiteer who'd trapped innocent families for money. Mr. Maddox could have simply asked people to move their cars, she argued. Instead, he chose to imprison their vehicles and extort money from working families. But the defense crumbled when James called our surprise witness. Former HOA board member David Chen had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony about the corruption scheme. He explained in detail how Linda had presented the festival parking plan as a way to establish community use patterns that could support future eminent domain proceedings. She said we needed to show the land was being used for public benefit, Chen testified. The parking was supposed to be documented as evidence that Mr. Maddox had allowed community access to his property. It was all part of the plan to force a sale to Meridian. The prosecution's case got stronger when they played recorded phone calls between Linda and Meridian executives discussing acquisition timelines and community pressure strategies. 1. Particularly damaging recording had Linda laughing about that stubborn farmer who doesn't know what's good for him. Wednesday brought testimony from a property valuation expert who estimated the development value of my southern field at $2.4 million. The jury learned that Meridian had planned to offer me $400,000 for land worth 6 times that amount, using the HOA's adverse possession claims to justify the lowball offer. Linda took the stand Thursday morning, and James methodically destroyed her credibility. When confronted with the recorded evidence of her admissions, she claimed she'd been speaking hypothetically. When shown the bank records of payments from Meridian, she insisted they were for legitimate consulting services. When asked to explain what those services were, she stumbled through vague answers about community outreach and development planning. The most devastating moment came when James played the recording of Linda's conversation with me on the morning of the festival. Her own voice filled the courtroom. "We're just temporarily borrowing this section for community benefit. It's almost like it was meant for this." The jury's faces showed clear disgust at hearing her casual admission of theft. Friday afternoon brought closing arguments. James painted a picture of systematic corruption and criminal conspiracy, while Wells made a last desperate attempt to portray Linda as a community volunteer who'd made an innocent mistake. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Clint Maddox," the foreman announced. "We award damages in the amount of $75,000 for property damage, lost use, and emotional distress. We additionally award punitive damages of $100,000 against Linda Rockwell personally and $50,000 against Cedar Oaks HOA." The courtroom erupted. Linda Rockwell buried her face in her hands while her attorney frantically took notes. I felt a surge of satisfaction, but also relief that justice had finally been served. Judge Hendricks wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court finds evidence of criminal conduct that has been referred to the district attorney's office. "Mrs. Rockwell, you should expect additional charges to be filed within the week." As we left the courthouse, reporters surrounded us with questions. I kept my statement simple. This was never about money. It was about protecting property rights and holding corrupt officials accountable. Today, justice was served. That evening, the last 35 car owners finally paid their parking fees and retrieved their vehicles. The total came to $10,500, which I donated to a legal defense fund for property owners fighting imminent domain abuse. The metal fence came down the next morning, but the lesson it had taught would last much longer. 2 weeks after the trial, my farm looked like a fortress. The insurance settlement and court award had funded a complete security upgrade, new electronic gates with keypad entry, a professional camera system covering every acre, and motion-activated floodlights that could illuminate my property like a football stadium. The old chain-link fence along the southern boundary had been replaced with 8-foot steel panels topped with razor wire. Linda Rockwell had disappeared from Cedar Oaks the day after her criminal sentencing. 3 months in county jail, 5 years probation, and a $50,000 fine had apparently convinced her that Texas wasn't healthy for her anymore. Word around town was that she'd moved to Oregon, though nobody seemed particularly interested in confirming that rumor. The new HOA leadership had sent me a formal letter of apology, along with a legal document promising never to conduct activities on or near my property without written permission. They'd also voted to dissolve the Community Development Committee that Linda had used to coordinate with Meridian Corporation. The development company had quietly withdrawn all their zoning applications and moved their strip mall project to a willing seller 20 miles away. Mayor Kane had stopped by personally to thank me for exposing the corruption in his city. "You know, Clint, we found evidence that Linda was planning similar schemes against 4 other property owners. Your fence didn't just save your farm, it probably saved half the rural land in this county." I'd started offering educational tours of the farm for local school groups, partly as a community service, and partly because I enjoyed teaching kids about agriculture and property rights. The story of the Great Parking Fence War had become local legend, and children loved hearing about how their neighbor had outwitted the bullies from the city. The best development came 6 months later when Sarah Connor, the journalist who'd broken the corruption story, agreed to marry me. She'd been covering the aftermath of the HOA scandal and kept finding excuses to interview me about follow-up developments. It took me 3 months to realize she was more interested in the farmer than the story. On a crisp spring morning, I installed a new sign at my southern gate. Below the standard private property warning, I'd added a personal message. Territory protected by common sense and Texas law, don't test either one. Standing there in the early dawn light, I watched a car with Cedar Oaks HOA bumper stickers approach my property line, slow down significantly as the driver read my sign, then accelerate away without stopping. Some lessons apparently had been learned. The fence was gone, but its memory lingered. And somewhere in Oregon, I hoped Linda Rockwell occasionally woke up in a cold sweat, remembering the day she learned that Texas farmers don't back down from a fight.